Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone tuning in. Supatease here with another PvP commentary walkthrough, and in this one I will reveal all of my balanced Druid tricks and secrets in a wizard war. In patch 8.1, it's definitely clear that wizards are king. Welcome to Hogwarts. I hope you brought your broom and your wand and your swimming trunks, because it might be just a little bit damp. As we go into the deep end of dampening in these wizard cleave mirrors, I'm going to be going through my thought process, what I do in certain situations to be able to survive, and what I try to do to set up for kills. Now, the main goal in a wizard war is damage. So you want to be making sure that you are always maximizing your damage, hitting the target that is most exposed based on not only cooldowns but positioning. So keep your eyes open for targets that are standing out in the open so you can blow them up and tear them to pieces, basically. So the first main goal against a composition like this with the double spellcaster, as a double spellcaster, is to get your Moonfire and your Sunfire on as many targets as possible. But you also have the advantage of starting the match in stealth, so I look to try and take advantage of that for a surprise Cyclone to slow down or bait a Trinket, which actually managed to get the Elemental Shamans, which means we can kill him later on in a bash. Now, there's crowd control on my Mistweaver, and I'm currently in a stun. This is a scary situation that you want to trade a defensive cooldown for. In this position, I traded my Barkskin, reducing the damage and allowing my healer to sit through this crowd control chain. Stormkeeper, another hard-hitting attack from the Elemental Shaman, means that you want to be in bear form, and I use Frenzy Regeneration to recover my health back to full, getting ready to soak that big hit. Now look at the positioning. The Elemental Shaman is in line of sight, and I looked to try and punish with a bash, but was currently on diminishing return from the leg sweep of my Mistweaver Monk, and would have been better used on a different target, such as the Restoration Druid, into a Cyclone. However, you still want to hit whoever's most forward in the open, so I'm attacking the Restoration Druid. He's the most forward and out in the open and exposed. But I get stun locked by the Elemental Shaman, and I immediately look to my Mistweaver Monk. Is he in crowd control? Well, now he is, after I've been crowd controlled, which means I can peel the situation with Cyclone, and that's immediately what you should do. If your healer is in any crowd control and you've downloaded the add-on Big Debuffs from my add-on recommended video, you will see the crowd control to the left of their frame. So smooth the Mistweaver Monk with that green box. Any icon to the left of his frame means he's crowd controlled and can't heal me, so I need to cast Cyclone. As soon as no one is in crowd control on your team, time to get up those dots onto everybody, Star Surging whoever comes out into the open, and looking to maintain your Moonkin aura at as many stacks as possible, which means currently at 2 and now 3. Psyfiend, a very big threat you want to look to kill off as soon as possible, but due to Grounding Totem, some awkward positioning, I was not able to kill it that quickly, so I immediately go in bear form and use Frenzied Regeneration. Why? My healer was in crowd control. Look at that icon right next to his frame. If there's an icon there, it means he can't heal, means I need to be in bear form, trade defensive cooldowns, and look for Cyclones. Now, as soon as that crowd control is over, it's time to start attacking again. I see the Restoration Druid exposed in center field, so I stun him up, and I start casting on him, and I tell my team, let's focus down the Druid. He's the most exposed. Obviously, if your healer is in crowd control that you can remove, you want to remove it. So right there, he was in a Hex, which is classified as a curse, and I can remove it with decurse, which means you want to remove it as quickly as possible. You can see it being casted by the Shaman, and then time it to dispel it instantly on your healer and or the target of the choice of that Hex, and you want to remove them as quickly as possible. But your main goal now during the downtime where your healer is not crowd controlled and you do not have crowd control of your own is to keep dots on everyone. This is Sunfire and Moonfire, that blue and red icon above everyone's head. I want that on every target. But here in this situation, my Mistweaver is in crowd control. I will go into bear form, Frenzied Regeneration, and my Mistweaver opts to use Life Cocoon as well since I was already reasonably low health. now we're in a position where we've recovered, and I want to start attacking the healer a lot more frequently. Before dampening, the Shadow Priest isn't really much of a target because he heals himself through Vampiric Touch and he's self-sustainable. The Elemental Shaman is very similar with Healing Surge. So the Restoration Druid is really the only target where you can make your damage stick. So if you can pull him into the open and make him a target, you want to be doing that in this Wizard War. And how I'm doing that right now is by line of sighting the Elemental Shaman very far away from where the Druid is, and then he has to push off of his pillar to heal the Elemental Shaman. And when he pushes out, I tell my team that the Druid is pushed out, we move forward and we collapse on him and try and burst him down as much as possible. But in this situation, I see that my Mistweaver is in crowd control, so immediately start casting Cyclones because you want to slow down that damage as much as possible even if you are not the target. So I opt to Cyclone the Shadow Priest in that position because he was the only player on the team that did not have a Gladiator's Medallion to remove that Cyclone, which means he is completely removed from the match and can no longer be a threat. Whereas in that situation, if I had tried casting Cyclone on the Elemental Shaman, he may have been able to trinket and then continue his pressure and potentially burst down for a kill. So always look for those windows during crowd control on your healers on targets that don't have a Gladiator's Medallion, and you can see that on my Gladius add-on here to the right, which if you check out my add-ons video, you'll be able to download yourself and be able to see this information. It's got a timer currently with 1 minute and 22 seconds left. That is the Gladiator's Medallion. That is the ability that allows a player to get out of a Cyclone and continue attacking a target. Now I see the Restoration Druid exposed in center field. It's time to start launching an attack on him as we would like to be focusing him. So I tell my team, let's focus the Druid, burst him down, take out a bit of his mana, and try and poke him a little bit. Now in these Wizard Wars, the main objective for the first 5 minutes is to try and crowd control, burst for a kill, but it's very likely to go into dampening, and the main goal should be to do as much damage as possible, to tax the enemy healer's mana as possible, moving into the deeper stages of dampening. And you want to avoid death by casting Cyclones when your healer is crowd controlled. If there is no crowd control on my healer, I focus on keeping damage over time effects, Sunfire, Moonfire on everybody, and trying to attack the healer when they are in the open. Now in this position, my Mistweaver sat through a stun and dipped dangerously low, but I opt to instead Cyclone the Restoration Druid and try to keep pressure on the other two targets. But with the Grounding Totem, it basically soaked it all up. I see the Elemental Shaman casting Hex, and I look to remove that on the Mage. You always want to remove any curses that you can. These are things like Curse of Agony against Warlocks, Curse of Havoc against Destruction Warlocks, Curse of Weakness, Curse of Tongues against Warlocks in general, and in this case, Hex. So anytime Hex is being cast, look at your party frames to the left, see who it's being casted on, and remove it as quickly as possible with Remove Curse. Now you can see the spread pressure on multiple targets is starting to tax the Druid's mana, as he's already down to roughly about 70%, and we have pressure on multiple targets. Now when we move deeper into dampening, it's going to be important to have pressure on multiple targets, and you want to switch off the targets who have defense currently active. What are the defenses that this team has that you need to be aware of? Well, the Shadow Priest has Dispersion, and you will be able to see that on your Gladius frame next to the Shadow Priest frame. It looks like a purple swirly. You don't want to attack into that. It reduces a lot of damage. So you switch targets. You can attack the Elemental Shaman. Their defensive is Astral Shift, which is not as potent as Dispersion, and you may be able to penetrate through if the target is low enough. So keep your eye on that. Then moving to the Druid, what is their defense? Well, they've got Bark Skin and they've got Iron Bark. So if you're attacking them, they're likely to use Bark Skin, but it's once again, not an omnipotent defensive. You may be able to kill through it if they are low enough and you have enough damage. And they have Iron Bark, which can be used on any member of the team, and looks like a brown-green leafy icon that you'll see on Gladius. Currently here, we've got good damage on the Elemental Shaman. He's the most forward target out in the open. In a Wizard War, you're just maximizing your damage, casting on whichever player is the most forward pressing and in the open. And what happens is you'll force them to backpedal and you'll force them to stack up. When they stack up, they are more open for potential cleave, so Arcane Barrage in this case, with the Arcane Mage that I'm playing with, and that can just pew-pew a bunch of targets down. You can apply your Sunfire with one cast because it's area of effect. Psyfiend, a dangerous threat you want to remove immediately with Sunfire or Moonfire when you see it on the battlefield. And Lightning Lasso is a devastating attack that can burst you down, even more so when your healer is crowd controlled. Your immediate reaction to that should be Bear Form, Frenzied Regeneration, to recover, and when Hex is being cast, you want to remove that as quickly as possible in this specific matchup. Maintain your damage over time effects on all targets to generate astral power and create spread pressure. Now that we've moved into dampening, and the match has more basically started in these Wizard Wars, they are quite slow and you need to play very methodically and play for that long game. It takes a lot of endurance to really make it to that point. It can be very frustrating, but you want to always be maximizing your global cooldowns, your damage output, and your defense, because if you're not careful in a situation like this where the Elemental Shaman almost burst down my mage, if I wasn't thinking right on point to start casting a Cyclone, he can be erased from the arena and all of your time can go wasted. In this position, they set up cross crowd control, which means they crowd controlled both myself and my healer, which isolated my mage. I had to use my Gladiator's Medallion when he is isolated to trinket and support him with Cyclones or Regrowths as soon as possible. So whenever the enemy team initiates cross crowd control, where multiple members are crowd controlled, someone on your team, especially deep into dampening, should be using that Gladiator's Medallion to remove the crowd control and start supporting. Now you can see we've slowly stacked the enemy team up by attacking the closest wizard, which means we've stacked them up for a triple leg sweep, and we can start building a lot of momentum and forcing cooldowns. So with 5 seconds left, the Restoration Druid currently has Barkskin activated. I don't want to attack into that. I would rather Cyclone it, prevent him from topping himself off, and or in this case, get him to use that Gladiator's Medallion to remove it, which means he won't be able to remove it in a stun later on, potentially opening him up for a kill. Now, we seem to have a lot more momentum in this specific matchup. Mistweavers, I would say, are the most potent healer and the most powerful, especially in a Wizard War such as this, with Counteract Magic and Way of the Crane. So we have more immediate recovery, whereas the Restoration Druid is a lot more sustained over time, and it will become much more difficult for him to do that later into dampening, whereas my Mistweaver can almost immediately top the whole team with Way of the Crane. So we can be a lot more aggressive, and now in dampening, start to stand on top of them. You don't want to risk it before dampening, because the Elemental Shaman burst is more threatening than your team with the Arcane Mage Balance Druid. So wait until dampening to get aggressive and make your move. Now in this position, my mage is getting bursted, so I'm looking to cast Cyclones and trying to slow down any potential crowd control or damage and give time for my Mistweaver to recover. In this position, the Shadow Priest is now the most forward member, and he's standing on top of my Mistweaver. I don't like wizards standing on top of my healer, so I'm immediately going to switch to the player that's most forward and standing on the healer and try to press them away from being on top of them, because now in this position, they've got us stacked on top of each other, which opens us up to potential cleave. So still for attacking the Shadow Priest, the most forward member, and you don't want to be attacking the Shaman here because he's got Iron Bark active with 3 seconds left on that Gladius frame. You don't want to be Star Surging that, so you switch targets. We go to the Shadow Priest. He uses Dispersion, that purple swirly, with 2 seconds left on it now. And we've pulled 2 cooldowns from the team by making a swap when one defensive was active. You do not want to Star Surge into a defensive cooldown. Star Surges all of your damage. You make sure that you maximize it by hitting a target that does not have defense. In this position, I choose to Cyclone the Shadow Priest to remove some of the utility, slow down some of the damage as my mage is in a stun, allow my Mistweaver to recover, but I see that Shadow Priest, he's a pesky one, pushing forward on top of my healer. I immediately switch to him to try and pressure him away, and as soon as the Restoration Druid is back out in the open, I look to attack him. But defense first, safety first. My Mistweaver was in crowd control. Bear form. Assess the situation. How much burst is hitting me? Is it a lightning lasso? Is it a Stormkeeper? If so, then I'll use Frenzied Regeneration to recover from it, and or maybe Renewal, especially deep into dampening. My Mistweaver here is in quite a lot of trouble. He's dangerously low health, so instead of going for damage, I choose to use Cyclone and stop it. But as I said, Barkskin isn't necessarily that strong to survive on its own, and sometimes deep in dampening you'll kill through it. So in this one scenario, I Star Surged into Barkskin, committed a stun to the target, and managed to pull more than just Barkskin. I pulled his Gladiator's Medallion again, which means he won't be able to remove a stun later on, and is a lot more vulnerable to death in in the near future. Now, it's basically a dog pile at this point, with dampening ramping up to insane margins. We want to play aggressive and get a stun as soon as possible on the Druid. With no Barkskin and no Gliders Medallion, his defense is quite low. So we moved in with a leg sweep and tried to switch to him and burst him, but with the support of his team, he was able to survive. I then looked to Cyclone the Restoration Druid, as his party member, the Shadow Priest, is currently already low health and increases the likelihood that we may be able to take him out. But with Grounding Totem redirecting spells, it denies the kill. And now with Iron Bark active, he is no longer the target you want to select. You want to switch to a different one. In this case, I go after the Restoration Druid for as long as possible, keeping my dots up still as the main priority to generate astral power. And because they're instant cast, I can do them while moving and chasing the target. So we've established more pressure, we have a mana lead, and every stun we want to be putting into the healer because he has no Gliders Medallion, and we want to try and burst him down as much as possible. We get Barkskin and Dispersion in this position, and I choose to crowd control the Elemental Shaman because he's the highest health target, and I want to remove his support from the team because the Restoration Druid is starting to struggle to heal the damage. Once again, kill off those Psi-Fiends. They are a threat. Psi-Fiend, Lightning Lasso, these spells are the spells that can close the game for us and make us lose. So if we're not aware of them, removing them from the game as soon as possible, we might lose. Now I go for a Cyclone on the Restoration Druid, and I try to get 3 of these in a row, and I look to burst down the Shadow Priest, moving into Dampening, as I believe he's a little bit more vulnerable than the Elemental Shaman. In this position, I'm in a Lightning Lasso. I have no Barkskin. I immediately switch my vision to Smooth, the Mistweaver Monk, and look to see if there's any boxes next to his frame, like the one right now, Psychic Horror. And if there isn't, I don't go into bear form, and I don't trade any defense. Now, in this position, Iron Bark is currently active on the Shadow Priest, so using a Star Surge onto him would not be beneficial, as its damage would be significantly reduced. Instead, I get topped off in bear form, benefiting from the Honor talent that increases the healing you take in bear form, so that I can push in and go for a stun as soon as possible on the enemy healer and try to burst him down. Now in this position, they protect the healer with a silence, and I need to move in line of sight of my Mistweaver so he can remove it as quickly as possible. Now there's crowd control on my Mistweaver, so I get ready. I trade Barkskin, and I get Lightning Lassoed. With this Barkskin active and my Mistweaver no longer in crowd control, I get topped off, and we've still got pressure on the Druid. It's all about running down the Restoration Druid once you get into Dampening, really, in these Dampening Wizard Wars, going after the healer. And because we bursted him down so heavily and he's running out of defense, the Shadow Priest had to use Void Shift, which switches their health. If that happens, you always got to keep your eye on the Shadow Priest. You might be able to pop a quick Star Surge onto him and take him out. Now currently, the Restoration Druid has Iron Bark active. That reduces damage. I don't really want to be focusing big attacks on him. Instead, it would be beneficial to Cyclone. Unfortunately, he line of sights. Regardless, Dampening is mounting up to a point where his heal over time effects aren't really doing too much, and it's a buffet of targets. I can hit anybody I want at this point that's standing in front of me, and I choose the Elemental Shaman even though he's got Astral Shift, because it's powerful, but not necessarily powerful enough to survive this deep into Dampening. Now, Lightning Lasso and Psi-Fiend, that's a threat. Even though the Druid is low, I gotta remove that threat as soon as possible, then look to maintain my damage over time effects, and just try my hardest to push them over. Ending these Wizard Wars can be quite difficult, and you still want to keep your eyes open defensively, because one quick Earth Shock, one quick Psi-Fiend, like such as here, could just close the match for you, even though you felt like you've got all the momentum, even though you might have felt like you had the lead the whole time. It can be just snatched away from you at any second. So if you're not defensively aware of those situations, constantly looking at your party frames, you can lose the match. In this position, I see the Elemental Shaman low. He does currently have Iron Bark, but because Dampening is so high, I start using the Star Surges into the Iron Bark because it can be enough damage to push them over the edge. Critical mistake here, I use Star Surge into Grounding Totem. You do not want to do that because it reduces the damage of it by 100%. You get absolutely no value. Do not use Star Surge into Grounding Totem. This is a major mistake that I made towards the end of the match, as Star Surge is basically all of your damage. Now here, a Psi-Fiend goes neglected. You see that little sneaky Psi-Fiend at the corner of the tombstone, that red health bar? Because we didn't pay attention to that, they got an ice block from my mage. You can tell that because the match is so long, we're starting to falter, but not necessarily all of the way, because they're just so overwhelmed at this point that it's basically unrecoverable. It's likely that they're going into a triple kill. I mean, the Shadow Priest is just desperately mind controlling me to buy any time that he possibly can to stay alive. But if you manage to make it to this point in Dampening as a balanced Druid Wizard cleave, you're going to just be tearing all 3 targets apart, swapping between them, and having a good time. So with these balanced Druid comps, defense first, safety first, keep your team alive, because if you can manage to make it for that long, you're going to be getting triple kills. Before that point, definitely look to hit the wizard that's closely positioned to your team, and if the healer manages to expose themselves, always look for an opportunity to switch to them. So I hope that this video was helpful for you in your wizard wars here. I'm starting to get dampened a bit there in my speech, but if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, hitting the notification bell. I'm making videos every single day, and I've got a doozy one that I'm in the works for tomorrow. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. You'll definitely want to check it out, so make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell to see it. Of course, leave your comments and your feedback down below. I'm always reading it. I'm always checking it out to provide you guys with the best content possible to keep you guys as well educated, because I'm all about increasing the level of competition for everybody so that we can all just continue to compete, continue to get better, and enjoy the game as a group. So that is my main goal, and thank you very much for tuning into the video today. I'll see you in the next one.